Hello to everyone and welcome. So, today I wanted to take some time to talk just about vaccinations, immunity resistance, some of those things that we had spoke about in the past in some of our recent videos, and answer any questions that anyone may have regarding this. So, if you're just hopping on here, hello, I hope everything is well. All right. So I am going to get started basically just talking about the difference between immunity and resistance and what goes into that. So, there's some confusion when it comes to the terms immunity and resistance when it comes to your animals that you may already have on your farm or that you may be bringing to your farm. And a lot of individuals that are selling livestock like to tell you that they are offering you animals that either have resistance or have a immunity up front before you purchase them. And this has almost everything to do with exposure, and that's important for you to remember. In order to develop immunity, or to determine if an animal actually has resistance, we need to have a certain level of exposure there. So, there is a difference to understand. For instance, if we're talking about worms, that's the big thing that comes up a lot with with our viewers over and over and over. They ask questions about worms, and some people are under the impression that certain breeds offer immunity to worms, and some people are under the impression that animals are going to be resistant to certain worms or parasites. And I guess the main thing that you need to understand before you bring these animals back to your farm is that um, you don't really know what you're getting until you bring it on your farm and it's exposed to what's on your farm. So let's use the example. If you are purchasing an animal and they tell you, this animal has never had worms before, or I've never wormed this animal before, um, that is great, and that means that maybe on their farm, they don't have worms. Um, so you bring them back to your farm. The next thing that you notice is all of a sudden now this animal has got this horrendous worm load, and you don't understand what in the heck's going on. How is this possible? Well, it all goes back to that exposure again. Maybe on that individual's farm, that animal wasn't exposed to a certain parasite, and then you bring them back to your house, and it is. Um, so we'll get into that more later. But again, I wanted to talk primarily tonight about immunity and resistance and exposure. And I guess the best place to start talking about that is with the little ones, with the lambs and the goat kids. So there is some confusion about immunity, how important colostrum is, why it's important, and why it matters. And we've talked about this in some of our previous videos, but I think it bears repeating. There's a very small window of time when it comes to colostrum with babies, with lambs or with goat kids. The colostrum is important because it's going to provide some passive immunity to that baby, but they also have a very small window of time in which they can take it in. So, in that window is about 24 hours. 24 to 36 hours is about the max that they can actually absorb the antibodies that are there in the colostrum. Once you miss that window, it's over and done with. There is no going back. So you need to keep this in mind when it comes to um, how much colostrum they're getting, when they're getting it, and if you need to supplement with some kind of secondary source of colostrum, um, how you need to go about doing that. So again, for the first 24 hours, it's important that the animals get colostrum, and there's a couple different ways that we can go about this. On some of the big farms, on some of the big production farms, and a lot of you, this may be a shock to you, but the reality is on a lot of the big production farms, as soon as the babies are born, what we do is we milk out the mom. We milk her out evenly on both sides, and we give we tube the baby, essentially, is what we do. When I say tube, I mean oral gastric tubing. So we take a tube, we shove it down their throat into their stomach, and we actually force feed them, I guess, is the probably the not most politically correct term to use, but we force feed them the colostrum, and it works out really well for a couple of reasons. If you're on a major farm where you're having babies that are being born every 15, 20 minutes, you don't have time to dote over, a single baby that may be a little bit slow to get up and get going. So the benefit is if you have babies that are born, you can just milk mom out of her colostrum, tube those babies, give that colostrum to those babies, and then you can walk away for 3-4 hours and you don't have to worry about them. You know that they got what they need. The other thing, and you've probably experienced this before too, if you have babies born on your farm, you generally have one that's born a little bit of time in front of the other, one or two, and you tend to have a strong one out of the group. And there's a lot of times where that strong one can really get all that colostrum, or a majority of that early colostrum, before the other ones even have a chance to get it at all. So tubing those babies is a way that in large production settings we get around that. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just trying to kind of expose you and give you some things to think about. If you are not comfortable with tubing a baby, I think that's something that you should learn and get used to, just in case of an emergency situation. Um, but again, this is just something that I'm trying to get you guys to start thinking about some things that maybe you haven't heard about before, or maybe you don't know too much about. So what do we do with a baby that's born, and let's say mom is really, really sick and she can't provide for the baby? So, and you can run into this with lots of different things. Either the mom, there's some serious complications, and maybe mom has passed away. Maybe mom is really sick and she can't stand. And now you've got these babies and you don't know what to do. Well, again, we have a very, very limited time window that we can get these babies what they need as far as colostrum is concerned. So if mom can't stand and you can't get anything, if she's alive, you can always milk her out, and harvest as much colostrum as possible, and then offer that to the babies in a bottle or tube feed them. If mom is not there, now you're stuck with, you're going to have to supplement that colostrum in some way, shape, or form. And again, you need to supplement that within the first 24 hours if you're giving it orally. So your first option is, if you have fresh frozen colostrum available to you, hopefully you have some frozen on hand and you're going to be able to give that to the baby. If you don't, you can always go to the store and you can pick up some colostrum mix at your local farm store and give that as well. Now, let's say worst case scenario, you've completely missed the window. Okay, so the baby didn't get any colostrum in the first 24 hours. Is there anything that I can do? And I get asked this question a lot. People say, for whatever reason, I got this baby from someone, or I missed the window completely and I'm over 24 hours. I can tell you, you can feed oral colostrum as long as you want. However, once you pass that 24-hour initial window, the baby can no longer absorb the antibodies in that, and the stomach is basically going to kill those antibodies as soon as they hit the stomach. So you're left with a very limited option, and the only one that I'm actually aware of is a product called Ovi Shield, and I'll actually type that in the comments right now. It's Ovishield, and this is a product that you can actually purchase from Premier One. I'm pretty sure that's how they spell it. If you go on Premier One's website and check it out, you can see it on there. And this is actually an injectable antibiotic serum that they have harvested from ultra vaccinated does and ewes. And basically, if you have a baby that needs to get some colostrum and you've missed that window, this is about as good of an option as you have. So it's definitely something that you might want to look into. It's not that expensive. You do have to overnight it to get it, because it has to remain cold, and I think it keeps for like a year. The best, easiest way to go about doing things is to just get your hands on some fresh frozen colostrum and freeze it, put it in the freezer, and then just warm it up before you give it to the babies, and you'll be good to go. Again, you can't microwave this stuff because you'll kill some of the beneficial antibodies in there as well. So you need to keep that in mind when you're warming this stuff up. You need to warm it up gently. So babies can't produce their own antibodies. They get all of this passive immunity from mom when they're born. So any mammal, including humans, we have what's called a thymus, and we won't get into the deep weeds of that. But basically, our body has to rev up for a little bit before it's able to produce its own antibodies effectively that are going to be long-lasting antibodies. So this takes time. That's why you've probably noticed if you've given vaccinations to lambs or goat kids before, a lot of times it'll tell you not to be giving that until you're at 6 to 8 weeks of age. And the reason for that is because it really doesn't have long-lasting immunity. The lamb or the goat kid, it can't produce antibodies effectively until they reach that time window of about 6 to 8 weeks of age. Not to say that you can't give an antibody before then, not to say that you can't give a vaccine before then. We do this all the time. But just to know it's not going to provide long-lasting immunity. Now, I have a couple of veterinarian friends that tell me, if they get a bummer lamb or a bummer goat kid that it didn't get enough real colostrum and it's a bottle baby and they're raising it out, they're actually giving CDT to that lamb or goat kid every week until they reach that 6 to 8 week age mark. And the reason for that is because people say, well, why would they give it every week? Well, the reason that they give it every week is because they know that that animal can't develop long-lasting immunity, and so they have to give it to them every week to keep them up to speed on things. So, if anyone has any questions about anything that I'm talking about as we go, feel free to put that in anywhere in the comments. So that's just kind of a quick down and dirty on babies and colostrum and why it's important, and hopefully that gives you some things to think about. One thing that I would like you to consider, and this is grafting. For those of you that raise livestock, at some point you're going to start toying around with the idea of grafting, and that would be where you have a baby that's maybe a bottle baby, or a baby that's not doing too well on mom, and you want to essentially assign that baby to another mother. You need to be very cautious when doing this, especially in regard to the colostrum. If you are introducing a really healthy, active baby to a mom that maybe just had a newborn, we don't want that baby that's being grafted onto that mom to go in there and suck up all the colostrum before the actual baby gets a chance to get at that. I personally would recommend, if you're going to graft a baby onto a mom, I think you should milk that mom out first, collect the colostrum, save it, and make sure that you are administering that to her babies, and that grafted one isn't getting that. Because the reality is that colostrum's not doing any good to that baby anyways, because it's too old. It can't absorb it correctly. And now you're hurting those new babies as well. We haven't made a video about grafting. I have had a lot of people ask me to make a video about grafting. The problem with that is it's very time restrictive. So I have to be out there at just the right time, and I have to have a bottle baby in order to do the grafting process. And it is pretty complicated. So sometime when the opportunity presents itself correctly, I will do a grafting video for you, but it's going to be a little bit of time. I will tell you that just if you're going to graft a baby to a new mom, it has to be done, and you want it to be done effectively and consistently. It needs to be done when that new mom is giving birth. To try to do it after the fact, it is a disaster, and you're going to have questionable results. We've had some moms on our farm that they'll just nurse anything and they don't care. But the reality is many of them do care, and the best time to do this is when the best time to do this is when those babies are being born. So we just had a question that popped up regarding Coccidia prevention. And I that works out well. I think it goes kind of in tune with what we're talking about right now. So coccidia essentially is something that is preventable. Um, you can't eradicate it, but you can help ward it off. And the best way to help deal with coccidia is by treating the moms before they have the babies. And so what we want to do is we want to get those moms on a good feeding program where they're getting a anti-coccidia medication, and there's lots of them out there. Decox, Bovatech. Um, there'll be more that come to mind here in a moment, but there's a lot of medicated feeds out there that you can get, and you can pick these up in your big box store. We sell them on Foundation Feed. However, you can pick up a pelleted medicated feed, that you can pick it up at Tractor Supply Company or anywhere like that. So the goal is you want to be offering this anti-coccidia medication to the moms before they are having the baby. That way they're not shedding all of this coccidia that these babies are going to be ingesting as soon as they're born. And then you're going to want to feed it to the moms and to the babies. So, the issue that we worry about, there's a couple things that we worry about digestively speaking with the babies when they're first born. And if you ever get asked this question by someone, you'll remember this. Sometimes people will have babies and they'll say, "Man, I don't know what's going on, but this baby just does not want to grow. I'm feeding this baby, and it like a failure to thrive kind of a situation." And there's two things that can really screw up a baby early in life, and that is coccidia or some type of serious gastrointestinal bug, or like or a parasite like a worm. And what's happening in both of these situations is the coccidia or the parasites or whatever actually do so much damage to we call it the mucosa, but it's the lining of the intestines. This is where all of the lining of the intestines is where all the nutrients are absorbed. Not all of the nutrients, but a majority of the nutrients that are absorbed in your animal's body and in your body are absorbed in the intestines. It's kind of I don't know the best way to put it, but basically, if you think of your intestines as a intermediary between the food that you eat and the nutrients that are absorbed, and they have to cross the lining of those intestines to get into the body. So what happens is if these little ones get exposed to coccidia or parasites, and they're so bad that they actually end up scarring the lining of the intestines up. And when the intestines get scarred, it is it creates a lot of problems for the rest of that animal's life when it comes to being able to absorb nutrients correctly. So what you'll see is you'll see a baby that's been maybe had coccidia and survived it, or had scours really, really bad when it's a baby um, due to a parasite load or E. coli or something like that. And then from that point forward, they never seem to grow well. And again, I want you to just imagine, if you can, that intestinal lining is completely destroyed, and they're just never going to be able to grow correctly because they can't get the vitamins and the nutrients that they need. So it's an internal problem. It's something that you can't see, and it all kind of goes back to that. So that's why coccidia is it's a real heavy duty thing that you need to be concerned about, and that you need to keep your eyes on. If you're taking the time to medicate, if you're taking the time to medicate them, then you don't necessarily have to worry about it. It will hopefully clear itself up. There are different levels of coccidia outbreaks, obviously, on farms. It lives in the soil. The moms carry it in their gut. There's nothing really you can do. To think that you're going to prevent any coccidia from being on your farm is not really reasonable. The main thing and the best thing we can do is to actually try to control it. If you have moms that are sickly, they have that failure to thrive. They just can't seem to put on weight, no matter, they have chronic wasting. There's lots of things that can cause chronic wasting, but if you see that manifest itself, then yeah, there's something going on there, and you should consider calling that you. Um, are lamb's kids more susceptible to worms than adults by April? So this is a really good question, and this goes back to resistance and immunity. So resistance and immunity requires a certain level of exposure. Um, so even in the case of immunity, it means you've been exposed to something, you've developed antibodies against it, and you're not getting it anymore. Resistance, on the other hand, just says when I'm exposed to this, I deal with it better than others do. So there are a few things when it comes to worms that babies kind of run a deficit. The first and foremost is tapeworms. Tapeworms is a young animal problem. It is not so much an older animal problem. There's varying schools of thought on this, but most of the universities will tell you that if you have babies, or I should say, if you have adults that are over 2 years of age, then tapeworms is really kind of a non-issue. We see it most in our new babies. So, worming new babies, we like to start off with a white wormer here on our farm. So white wormers, the first two white wormers that come to mind are Safeguard, Panicure, and then Valbazin. Both of those are white wormers. When I think of white wormers, I think white wormers like white worms, like tapeworms are white. And it's an easy way to remember. The white wormers tend to be the ones that help eradicate those tapeworms. So, ivermectin, the clear wormer families, Dectomax, things like that, they are not effective against tapeworms. And even our copper sulfate wormer that we like to use here, again, not effective against tapeworms. So yeah, lambs and kids are more susceptible to worms than adults. As they age, as your breeding stock ages, you'll notice that they are more and more healthy, more and more resilient. They have less and less issues with worms, and that's just something that comes with time and repeated exposure to these parasites. They seem to handle it better. And I guess that's something that you need to consider when you're doing, if you do fecal samples. When it comes to fecal samples, they can be misleading. Take fecal samples with a grain of salt. Some moms really shed, really shed worms, really shed coccidia. Others don't shed it very much at all. So, those fecal samples, while they are a good tool to use, they are not the be all end all of identification of if you have a worm load on your farm. And again, that comes down to immunity and resistance. The other thing to consider is herd immunity. Herd immunity, when you think about herd immunity, I want you to think about the deception that can cause on your farm. If a certain bacteria or if a certain parasite isn't present on a farm, then of course the newborns aren't going to get it. It's not there. It's not, if we've eradicated it from the farm and it's not there, of course the newborns aren't going to get it. So I'll use sore mouth as an example, and that was an example I used in a recent video. I don't have sore mouth on my farm anymore. We had it at one point, and a lot of farms I know had it, and then they just work it out of their flock and they don't have it anymore. So I can tell you, as a customer, if you come to my farm and I sell you a lamb or a goat kid, I can say, nope, they never had sore mouth. And I could mistakenly tell you that I assume they have some kind of an immunity to it or some kind of a resistance to it. But the reality is they just have never been exposed to it. The second you bring that baby back to your house, and it's exposed to it on your farm, it's going to get it. So that's kind of where that herd immunity comes into play. So bones, as far as watching body condition, I spoke briefly about this when we're looking at worms. When it comes to body condition, again, I always go back to that, using the back of your hand as an example. You need to feel over the ribs on your animals. It can be very, very deceiving as far as if they're gassy, if they're bloated, or where their nutrition is really at. You need to feel the rib cage in order to tell if that animal is conditioned properly. It is misleading to look at their belly and determine if they're properly conditioned or not. So, if you feel those ribs and you can feel those ribs and there's not any fat cover on them whatsoever, you're dealing with an animal that's malnourished. If you're running your hands over those ribs and you can't feel them at all, chances are you're dealing with an animal that's over conditioned. And then ultimately, we want to feel a healthy mix of the fat cover and the the fat cover and the bones together. I tell people, it should feel like the back of my hand here. It shouldn't feel like my fingers. It shouldn't feel like my wrist. It should feel like the back of the hand here. I can feel a little bit of the bones, but not too much. So that's where I want you to go as far as maintaining body condition. So I don't worry too much about like what the hip bones look like or anything else or what the belly looks like. I go strictly off of fat cover on the ribs. Anything more I can do to help her catch up? So we we had a question about having triplets. Yeah, triplets. Some moms, the rare mom can handle them really well. Um, a lot of moms can't. It depends on the breed and it depends on the mom. It depends more on the mom than it depends on the breed. I try not to go down that road, where people say this breed this breed that, and whether it comes to goats or sheep. I think that when you have triplets, you're always going to have a runt. I've never not had a runt. Some are more profound than others. Your best course of action is to try to graft that baby onto a mom that has a single, or a good milking mom that has a single. Um, she or he generally will catch up once they get on hay and grain, but it can take a long time for them to catch up. And when I say a long time, I mean you may not notice them catch up until they're 6 months old, a year old. I kind of are the first. I'm kind of the mentality that all of these animals have a certain genetic potential, and some of them get to size a little faster than others. As long as you're keeping that animal healthy, and as long as you're keeping those animals healthy, and as long as you're giving them everything they need from a nutritional standpoint, they will grow to their genetic potential. Some of them are going to get there faster than others. So with that weak triplet, the best advice I can give you is if you can't realistically graft them, or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, just make sure you're offering them good quality creep feed and good quality creep feed and good quality clean water and nutrition and all that. And eventually they will catch up. So yeah. So with that being said, let's kind of try to move on from there. I will say, I'm seeing some comments on here about like having moms that are rejecting their babies, things like that. Um, mm, a lot of people don't like what I have to say about that. Maternal instinct is usually good, whether it's first time moms, second time moms, things like that. We will at times cut our first time moms a little bit of slack, but I'm always hesitant to do that. Usually, if we get moms that lack a natural mothering ability, they're usually gone, because I don't have time to deal with that. If you have moms that are rejecting babies for whatever reason, that would be we could go through a whole video on that alone, which we may do in the future. But at the end of the day, there isn't a whole lot you can do to instill that mothering instinct. Now, we won't get in the deep weeds of that tonight, but I will tell you, if you're not utilizing a lambing or a kidding jug to where you're keeping them together for the first 24 to 48 hours, then that is something that you're probably going to want to keep in mind. But yeah, it stinks. Having to cull animals is not a fun thing. And unfortunately, it seems like some breeds are much better than others. It seems like some animals are much better than others. I always joke with my family, and I say it seems like my craziest ewes and does that I have make the best moms. It seems like my friendly, kind of aloof ones don't really do that well, but the ones that are just nuts every time I go out there and try to handle them seem like they make really good, seem like they make the best moms, and I don't know why that is, but um, it is what it is. So let's see, what else did I want to talk about? Our basic vaccinations that we normally give to our animals. Again, I think CDT is high on the list, the Clostridium and the tetanus. You need to really consider if you're. I don't like vaccinating any more than anyone else, but I can tell you that it is a necessity. You can't prevent the exposure that some of these things are going to cause. You can't prevent your animals from being exposed to tetanus. You can't prevent your animals from being exposed to Clostridium type C and D. You can't prevent them, even your ewes and your does. You can't prevent them from being exposed to certain types of abortion bacteria that are out there, that we're going to get to here a little bit later in the program. So while I know a lot of people don't want to vaccinate, and that's perfectly fine, I just want you to be educated, and I want you to know that you have to be prepared for the consequences. You can't have it both ways. Unfortunately, there is no herbal remedy for tetanus. If anybody finds one out, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to share it with my colleagues at the hospital. I think we'd all be really excited to hear that. And I'm not trying to be a jerk about that. I just want you all to be prepared and to know you can. I have friends that vaccinate like crazy. They vaccinate against anything and everything. And I think it's a little bit excessive. We try to meet a happy medium, and the CD&T I think is something that very important to give. Um, a lot of you don't have the animals that are born on your farm, and you're going to be bringing animals home to your farm, and they may or may not have been vaccinated. That is something that you absolutely need to ask the person that you're buying your animals from. You need to ask them, is there a record? Do you have a medical record for this animal? Has this animal had shots? If they have had shots, how many have they had and what have they had? That way you can know when you get those animals home. When in doubt, go ahead and vaccinate. If you're going to give them anything, give them Clostridium. So that would cover Clostridium type C and D, and tetanus. Now, some people will refer to Clostridium type C and D as overeating disease. And that's a regional thing that you may hear. They may refer to that as overeating disease. And the reason for that is the way that the illness manifests itself generally is associated with an overeating of grain. So just in case you were wondering, that's where it comes from. There's lots of other things that you can vaccinate against. You can vaccinate against E. coli. You can vaccinate against pneumonia. You can vaccinate against sore mouth. You can vaccinate against CL. The list goes on and on and on. You can't necessarily over vaccinate. I think you could vaccinate needlessly to where the animal is vaccinated against things that it may not necessarily need to be vaccinated against. You can cause what's known as an anaphylactic response. Some of these vaccines do not play well with each other. So, for instance, you would never want to give tetanus antitoxin together with a tetanus vaccine. That is a recipe for disaster with an anaphylactic response. The animal just has a horrible anaphylactic response. Basically, their throat swells up, they can't breathe, and they die. So yes, that is something that you want to consider. So would I say you can over vaccinate? No, not necessarily, but you can. You can. I guess, recklessly give medications that may not necessarily need to be given. Um, can you over deworm? Sure. That's a whole nother program about deworming. And again, worms are just like anything else. Um, Worms can develop resistance to wormers. Um, and so that can be an issue. So where do we run into issues with worming? Well, worming we run into issues with because I can tell you that a lot of the individuals that are doing club lambs and club goats, those are the ones I would refer to as just showing. They're going to be taking them to 4-H, taking them to the potluck shows, things like that. They worm their animals with chemicals, and I don't want to say they as in bundling all of them together, but I can tell you that a lot of people have worming programs that involve them worming their animals every 2 weeks, because the thought is they don't want to have any competition for the feed that they're giving those animals. That's a problem. When you're exposing worms to medications over and over and over and over and over, you're naturally going to develop a resistance, and that resistance can become troublesome for you later on down the road on your farm. So, copper sulfate, that is we do have a video out there. If you haven't watched the video on copper sulfate worming, I would recommend that you do. You can do a search for Linessa Farms trifecta method, and that's where I talk about how we work our way up to copper sulfate worming. If you're new to the whole copper sulfate worming thing, I know you hear the term copper and it just scares the holy heck out of you when you hear that, because copper is so fatal to almost all breeds of sheep, not all, but almost all breeds of sheep. I would say watch that video. It has a lot of good information in there that'll explain a lot of that to you. Um, to answer your question without getting too far down into the deep weeds of that, I'll tell you guys what I will do next week. When we do our next week meeting, we will talk about worming. That will be our topic that we talk about. That will be our topic that we talk about next week. Copper is complicated, and the reason that copper is complicated is because it has a lot to do with the method of absorption, and it's not nearly just so cut and dry as how much they can have. It's a matter of the method in which it's given, and how it's absorbed and how it's cleared from the body and things like that. So copper sulfate wormer has been used successfully for a very, 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 very long time with sheep. To put it into perspective for you, prior to the 1940s, none of this stuff actually existed. So none of these chemical wormers that have actually existed. So prior to the 1940s, we were giving copper sulfate, nicotinics, things like that to these animals in order to worm them. If you go to our copper sulfate videos and you go into the description, you'll see we have links in a lot of those videos to the University of Kentucky study that was done on copper sulfate worming. That's how they worm their sheep down there now. And they give copper sulfate to them all the time. I give copper sulfate to my sheep all the time. Haven't had one die from it yet, and I've been doing it for years and years. And yeah, I can worm mine. I know the University of Kentucky. I know the University of Kentucky did their study. I think they were given copper sulfate every 2 weeks, just to see what would happen. We have no need to do that. But during the summer months, yeah, we'll use the copper sulfate wormer a couple times during the summer month just to make sure that we're keeping everybody clean. Now, again, the copper sulfate wormer only treats a certain number of parasites. It's not effective against tapeworms. It's not effective against nasal bots. It's not effective against liver flukes. It's not effective against mange and things like that. So, you got to pick your medications. Unfortunately, when it comes to some of these things, there is not a reliable organic option out there that's been found to deal with them. And so that is a problem. So it's just kind of one of those things we're all learning as we go through this together. And again, when it comes to the copper sulfate, we're not telling anybody to go out there and buy copper sulfate and start feeding it to their animals. There's a very specific way that it has to be mixed up. There's a very specific way that it has to be administered. And you absolutely 100% have to follow the directions correctly, or you will end up causing serious problems with your animals. I know one of you just said copper scares me for my sheep, and it should. Yep, I think it should. It should scare you, just like Clostridium should scare you, and just like abortion should scare you. If you are raising, see, that's my segue to get back to the vaccination things. I wanted to talk about abortions on the farm, and this is a huge issue. If you are raising animals, you're going to deal with abortions. If you haven't started raising animals yet on your farm, or breeding animals on your farm, then you'll just have to take my word for it. And abortion is an issue. Late-term abortions, you're not going to see early-term abortions, because essentially the ewe or the doe just reabsorbs the embryo, and it's gone, and you're never the wiser. The only key that you'll see is that the animal actually rebreeds, goes back into heat, and you're like, yeah, I thought you were pregnant. The late-term abortions are the ones that you're going to see. There's three main ones that we see: the Vibrio, depending on who you are, tomato. Chlamydia is the other one, and then Toxoplasmosis. Toxoplasmosis is a huge one. And this Toxoplasmosis is often responsible for what we call abortion storms in flocks. And so abortions, think of, when I use the term abortion, I'm referring to babies being born preterm and being dead. So when you're looking at prevention, Toxoplasmosis is something that you really want to keep your eyes open for. So Toxoplasmosis usually presents itself to where the baby will be born 1 to 3 days early. If there's twins, one will be alive and one will be mummified. The one that is alive usually won't survive. It'll be very weak and sick. And the other one will be mummified. Toxoplasmosis, it's carried primarily by cats, and cat feces is a big one. So for those of you that have barn cats, they're just a natural carrier. I can tell you, as a healthcare provider, we talk to pregnant patients, and we don't advise pregnant female humans handle or around cat feces for that reason, because of the Toxoplasmosis as well. But that's a whole nother story. But Toxoplasmosis, when that does hit a farm, we've seen numbers as high as 75% abortion rates. And I know this is not a political thing. I'm just using the terms that they use in the industry, so you're aware of that. You can call it stillbirth, you can call it whatever you want. If you don't like the term abortion, it's the term that they use. So when you read the literature, when you read the stuff from the universities, when you read the veterinary books, they're going to refer to it as abortion. And obviously that's not the same thing that we refer to it as in people, but you need to understand that that's what they're talking about. So when you see the Toxoplasmosis hit the farm, you can see these rates up to 75%. So the main thing is, make sure you're keeping your cats away. Make sure that you are cleaning up. Make sure you don't keep your hay anywhere in the barn where the cats are peeing or pooping on it. And you can give Rumensin. Rumensin is a medication that we give primarily for coccidia, and that has been shown it's used off-label to prevent Toxoplasmosis. The other two major issues that it comes to with these birthing issues with sheep and goats can both be vaccinated against. So you can get vaccines for the Vibrio and for the chlamydia. Those are both easily purchased from online through Premier or anywhere like that, and you can pick these up. Um, and you would give them 30 days pre-breeding, and then you can give them a booster through mid-gestation. The other thing that we like to do is we like to offer aromycin crumbles to our females before the babies are born, going into those couple weeks prior to a couple weeks after. And that's just basically a tetracycline containing crumble that helps to clean up mom from any kind of infections that she may have, to help prevent those babies. So I see some questions on here about hogs. Don't know anything about hogs. Not a hog guy, not a hog channel. Sorry. Um, so moving on to, let's see, Conrad. Conrad, you had a question about vaccination protocol for kids and timeline. So vaccination protocol that we follow on our farm, when our babies are born, um, whether they're lambs or goat kids, we offer CDT and penicillin mixed injection given subcutaneously. So I mix 1 milliliter of penicillin and 1 milliliter of CDT vaccine together, and I offer that. Um, Ah, man, how do I get rid of people on here? So let's see. I am going to put this user in timeout. Sorry, guys, I'm getting spammed here. So the vaccination protocol for our babies. So when the babies are born, I give the 1 milliliter of CDT mixed with the 1 milliliter of penicillin subcutaneously, and that is to protect these babies from navel ill. This is not my invention. I get beat up a lot about this online. This comes from Pipestone Veterinary. Dr. Kennedy was the kind of the guy that started doing this, and he was the one that started doing this. We do it. We've had really good luck with this. After the initial shot of the CDT and the penicillin, anytime that we're creating a wound, we make sure that we are giving either tetanus antitoxin or CDT. The best thing to use really is tetanus antitoxin. So this would be a tail docking, ear tagging, or castration. And then once those babies hit 6 weeks, so this again is lambs or goat kids at 6 weeks of age, we are going to offer them their first full dose of CDT, which is 2 milliliters subcutaneously. And then at 8 weeks, we're going to give them their second dose of their CDT, again, 2 milliliters subcutaneous over the ribs. And then that animal should be good to go, being covered for Clostridium, type C and D, and tetanus until they are 1 year of age, and then we're just going to give them an annual booster from there on out. As far as our moms are concerned, we like to give them a vaccination about a month or two out from delivery. That way they can have those vaccines on board to pass on to their offspring through that passive immunity. So, and that is basically what we do for our vaccinations for our little ones. Now, if you notice that you are running into issues with pneumonia, running into issues with E. coli, things like that on your farm, there are other vaccines out there, Conrad, that you can offer your animals, but that's something that you'll have to decide. We always like to tell people, no kidding. We always give the CDT, and everything else we consider optional for you. So as far as coccidiosis, there is no vaccine that you can give for the coccidiosis. Again, just goes back to the preventative medications that we're going to give to the moms and to the little ones. So again, here on my farm, I treat all of my pregnant ewes and does with a medicated feed that has medication in it to help prevent coccidiosis, at least keep it under control. and I start offering that to them at least a month out from having their babies. And then I also have coccidiosis controlling medication, primarily Decox. I like to use Decox. That is in my creep feed that I offer all the time. So my goal is I want to protect the moms. I want to keep the babies from being exposed to the coccidia when they're little. And then I want to keep protecting them up through weaning. And we offer free choice creep here on our farm. Obviously, if you're out on pasture, if you're raising your animals out on pasture, and you're not offering free choice creep or something like that, you're not offering grain, that's okay. You can still protect your animals from coccidia. You can just offer a mineral that has coccidia medication in it. I know they're out there. I know for a fact because we sell it on our store at foundationfeed.com. You can just get a free choice vitamin mineral that also free choice vitamin mineral that also has coccidia medication in it as well. So good question. Anyone else have any questions? We got about 10 minutes left before we wrap it up. Just seeing if anyone else has any other questions out there before I move on to something else. Okay. So again, we talked about it in the beginning, but it warrants repeating when it comes to medicated feed. We always worry about coccidia, and again, we really want to watch those little ones. At least we normally see that our babies will maybe get a little bit of loose stool when they're first going on creep. Feed, but it doesn't last. It's usually pretty quick, and we want to watch for that. Like I said, the coccidia and the really bad scours from things like E. coli, things like that, it basically just scars up the intestinal wall, and then you're going to end up with an animal that has a failure to thrive forever, and that's an issue. So something that you're definitely going to want to keep an eye on. Next week, oh goodness gracious. So the next week we're going to talk about worming, and we'll kind of devote most of our time to that. So something for you to think about when we're moving into that next week. Questions or comments that you may have. All right. Anyone else have any questions for tonight? All right. So, if you have questions, comments, concerns, you guys can always contact us. There's no issues with that. You know how to get in touch with us. Watch the videos. If you have questions or if there's any issues that you don't understand, just let me know. This has been this is all new as far as doing the forum. This has been new. So I suspect things will get better and get a little bit smoother as we move further along. I'm kind of learning as you guys are as we go. So with that being said, I think we're getting ready to wrap things up. We do have lots of videos out there for you as far as vaccines, how to administer the vaccines, and pretty much things out there to help you guys out. Trying to think of anything else. We've recently moved our animals out to pasture, so we're going to be having some videos coming up soon regarding that. That should help you guys out a lot. I know some of you kind of do a dry lot. Some of you do pasture. Some of you do all pasture, and trying to find information that suits you based off of what you're doing can be difficult. So we're going to be doing this every Wednesday. if you have questions, uh, if you have questions during the week that things that you'd like us to cover, uh, let me know. It helps me out. It helps me be more prepared when I come on here. The videos, I guess I don't usually use a lot of um, note card. Well, I don't use any note cards. Everything I do is pretty much off the cuff. So this doesn't really bother me too much because, I either know the information or I don't. And if I don't know it, I just tell you I don't know the answer and I'll look it up. Um, so Conrad, do I accept visitors on the farm? Yeah. We offer visitors on the farm. We offer visits to the farm. We normally have operating hours on the weekends where we have people come out. We have some schools that we offer throughout the year. So, for instance, this fall we'll have shearing school. People can come out for that. We usually offer one big farm get together once a year where people can come out and see. We have that on the main farm here. We actually have animals at multiple locations. So a lot of what you see in the videos is actually filmed here at our farm being the place where I live. But we also have acreage and paddocks and things at other locations within a half an hour. Within a half an hour you can get to any of our other locations. So yeah, there's a lot more than I guess what you see online. But I guess that's probably to be expected as well. It's nice to see you guys on here. It's nice to have some of you commenting and seeing some of the names of the people that I recognize. I know a lot of you have been with us since the very beginning. I know we're not as entertaining as some of the channels out there, but that's not really our thing. We're just kind of a nuts and bolts educational, just kind of a educational channel, and that's what we're here to offer. So, yeah. Any last questions before we get going? You got about 2 minutes to ask if there's anything else that you guys want to know, or anything else that's pressing, or any ideas that you have. I think our next video we're going to talk about. Worming. I think that's kind of a hot topic that we get a lot of things about. But if there's anything else that you'd like to see, please let us know. Alrighty. All right. Well, it's been nice visiting with you guys today. I hope everyone's doing well. We'll have a video coming out again this weekend, probably on Saturday. Yeah. All right. Well, I am Tim from Linessa Farms, Specialty in Heirloom Livestock. Thanks for joining us again today, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.